our Hot Topic webinar series as part of our ongoing CoSA and Preservica Practical Digital Preservation webinar series that actually started last year and is going to continue through fall of this year thank you. So we're going to have our next two in the Hot Topic webinars are going to be the new ways of providing public access to your archive in April, and then real-world digital preservation and program resources roundup in June. But just a quick reminder that coming up in March, quite rapidly, we are going to have the second of our two-part workshops, one on March 8th and one on March 15th. So if y'all know of anybody who might be interested in those, please feel free to send them to the website below, or anybody who would like to sign up. You can go online and sign up. But for today's program on automating email archiving and preservation, we are going to be joined here by Michael Hope and Mark Myers. Michael is our continuing leader in this, and he has worked in IT and information management for over 25 years. His recent focus being marketing director for Preservica, and has spent a lot of time raising awareness of the importance of digital preservation, including devising and running education programs such as ours in partnership with other groups and ourselves. Our second person is Mark Myers, who we are all very familiar with, and he is the Senior Electronic Records Specialist with the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. He has over 17 years of experience in electronic records management and digital preservation. And while he's only been with Texas since June of last year, he was the electronic records archivist with the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives for 13 years. So while we're going through the presentation and you have any questions, feel free to enter it in the chat box on the right-hand side, or Q&A, whichever one you have up, and we will capture those and get to them at the end. And also, at the end, when you close your browser, there will be our survey, which we always send up. But everyone's a winner today, and with every completed survey, you actually get a copy of today's presentation. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Michael.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And it's also a delight we're going to go back one. It's also a delight and privilege to be partnering with CoSA to deliver this series of webinars and workshops on practical digital preservation. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm also delighted that Mark has joined us also to give us a real-world insight into the challenges that they're facing at Texas in terms of preserving email. But before I hand over to Mark, I'll explore some of the wider challenges and requirements for email preservation, as well as after Mark's spoken, I'll look at a short example of how preservation tools can help automate and simplify the whole task and challenge of doing email preservation using a simple sort of Gmail ingest example. So why is email preservation important? Why do we need email preservation? I think as archivists and records managers have long been charged with preserving significant records, and correspondence has been no exception, whether it's been letters or telegrams. And as we know increasingly today, most communication, so formal communication, is done through email. So even if there is a formal letter or a contract or an invoice or another piece of information that is drafted and put onto headed paper, it's usually emailed as an attachment rather than being put in the actual post today. So capturing emails and attachments are important records to be able to archive and preserve. Unless specific steps are taken to look after these records can be lost. So looking at the wider challenge around email preservation, I think the reports of the death of email has been greatly exaggerated. Email is still growing exponentially in many organizations, and it's also costing money to store and archive. So there's a big focus in a lot of organizations in terms of what you need to keep, what can you throw away, legally and defensively, and how long do you actually need to keep those emails for. And that's a big part of the challenge of email, as well as the technical challenge of preserving the emails, as we'll come on and look at in a short while. But increasingly, it's actually a requirement. So it is a record, and you might have to keep emails for you're mandated to keep them. There might be a compliance and a retention and regulation period you need to keep emails for. You might want to be keeping emails for litigation or legal defense, particularly if you're passing contracts or other information around. There's a whole issue around transparency. You can see the famous Hillary Clinton gate email news piece on the right-hand side. So the whole issue around being transparent about what's going on email. And then there's the heritage or the legacy aspect of prominent individuals or significant individuals within the organization. So increasingly, it's a record, and we need to decide what to do with it. But compounding the challenge is also difficult to collect and appraise, probably more difficult than other types of digital objects, not just for the technical challenges, but also you have a mix of a vast quantity of emails, but you also have a mix of personal and private. You have some which are deemed to be records, others which are probably non-records, and as we'll see from some of the challenges that Mark is facing in Texas State, there's whole redaction challenges, and then also control over who can see emails in what time frame. Tools can help, and in fact, if you've got a big challenge, I'd suggest that they not just help, but it could also be quite essential in terms of overcoming laborious manual tasks. So email itself is a technical challenge. So it's aside from the policy, the appraisal, the compliance, and the sort of legal challenges, email is a complex file format to work with from a technical perspective. The standard for email is pretty well defined. The Internet Message Format, RFC 5322, but then there are various variations on that, some of which are open standards like EML, others which are proprietary like the MSG format used by Microsoft, as well as there are container formats for entire mailboxes like PST for Outlook and Mbox for Gmail. So there's lots of different varying formats for storing emails, some open and some proprietary. And then, as you can see on the screen there's many different systems for reading those different message formats. Again, some of them open, some of them proprietary, and all of them potentially, those applications potentially become obsolete, as well as some of the file formats themselves. Email is also challenging because you have connections and relationships between emails. So you have context, we have email threads, and that makes the whole thing more complicated to try and archive or preserve. And of course, on top of that, as I was saying at the beginning, typically today emails can be quite short, and the bulk or the important part of the record is actually held in the attachments themselves, which could be a contract or an invoice or some other formal sort of record. and they could be in arbitrary, file formats, potentially any format. So you'll be looking at long-term preservation. You have to think of those file formats going forward into the future as well. So there's a few solutions to email today, and typically if we're looking at less than 3 years, then we're probably talking email archiving, and there's hundreds of different email archiving solutions out there, and the drivers for email archiving can be compliance and regulation, but usually it's a cost, an operational cost, taking things away from the live system and putting them into archiving, or keeping some near-term records of organizational decisions. When we get into preservation, then we're typically looking at records and information that needs to be kept for longer than 10 years, whether that's for mandate, compliance or legal reasons, or for heritage. And unlike email archiving, email in terms of preservation might just be one of the formats that you're looking after within your archive, whereas email archiving systems tend to be quite specialized and focused just around email. So some of the solutions today, as I said, there's plenty of email archiving solutions, and typically they just store PST files, so the container format, for example, for Microsoft Outlook, which contains a whole collection of folders, and rather than just individual messages, and it stores that information using bit level protection. So there's no concept of file format migration or the ability to move file formats forward over time. It's purely just a way of storing emails in bulk, and as you can see there, using PST can make it difficult to search and discover emails in the future. If you do a Google search, you'll find a whole bunch of tools for doing email preservation, individual tools. Some can convert email to PDF format, which might be useful, or others can move between different types of mailboxes, typically into an EML, which is electronic mail format, which is more of an open format than you might find with Google Inbox or with a Outlook PST files. But what's kind of missing for some of these solutions are you have emails, but also, as I said, the payload, the most important information, might actually be held in the attachment itself. You have extensive context and relationships between different emails and email threads, which needs to be captured. You have the need to do active preservation, not just on the file format, the attachments themselves to keep those alive, but also on the containers, the email container formats as well. You might want to provide control down to an individual record level. So you might have some very sensitive emails that only certain people can see, other emails which other people can see within the system. Search is a key thing if you want to be able to find emails for legal defense or for compliance reasons quickly and easily. And the ability to render is also important, so you can actually see the email without having the native applications. You don't have to have try and pull it back into Gmail or try and pull it back into Microsoft Outlook. A way of being able to render that email without having the native application is important. And then other factors, because these are records, some way of categorizing and tagging the information. So you can tag it for future disposal or appraisal, or if you want to apply a particular security tag to the information. And then the ability to demonstrate trustworthiness. is also something that's maybe missing from other solutions. So applying fixity, fixity checking, audit trails, and metadata to the email. So we look at some of the requirements in a sort of summarized way, then as well as the ability to move formats forward into the future, to keep them active so they can still be read and don't become obsolete, both for the attachments and for the email itself. That's obviously a core function. Widening things out a little bit, you want to make sure that the email is actually is findable, is readable, and also you can demonstrate that it's trustworthy as well. So, if you're looking at a system for preserving emails, then also look for audit trails and metadata to show the provenance. Something that does fixity, both of the email attachments as well as the files, the email files themselves, so you can prove they haven't been tampered with either maliciously or accidentally. Obviously, you want something that's going to provide durable storage, so multiple copies, multiple locations. As I was saying, also something that allows you to dispose of emails which you might come up to the compliance or retention period, and you immediately want to defensively dispose of that email. So something that allows you to tag it and make decisions in the future. Control who can see it, and a crucial thing, be able to search and find emails quickly. So I'm just going to hand over now to Mark, who's going to discuss some of the sort of real-world challenges that they're facing in Texas, and then I'll take up and take a look at a Gmail example where we look at the inbox format and how that can actually be pulled into a system in practice, and how that sort of type of system can help automate and simplify the challenge of preserving emails. Over to you, Mark.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Can everybody hear me? Somebody can.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, we're good.
All right, and then I can advance slides. Yay! All right. So I thank you all for attending, and thanks to Michael for asking me to do this. He emailed me a couple of weeks ago and said, are you all dealing with email in your Preservica instance? And I had to say, on one hand we are. On the other hand, we're not dealing with it in Preservica. So as most of you, I think, know, I came to Texas in 2014 on the heels of Texas preparing to receive the records of Governor Rick Perry, who was governor of Texas from 2000 to 2015. We got 4,000 cubic feet of paper records. We also got about 7 terabytes of electronic records. And that's what we use to kind of build our Texas Digital Archive. Of the 7 terabytes of electronic records, 6 of that was photos and video. So then we're dealing with the office files being kind of the rest of it. But what we got from the governor's office was the CTS, or the correspondence tracking system, which I'll talk about kind of on the next slide, which I think a lot of states are dealing with things like IQ, which is the email tracking systems that legislatures are starting to use now. This is kind of the same thing, but it was homemade by the governor's office here in Texas. So it was a custom designed correspondence tracking system. We did get some PST files, largely in the Perry collection. We got mostly calendars, Outlook calendars of several members of the executive staff. We didn't get any internal email really to speak of. We did get some individual MSG files from certain officials who basically just kind of saved individual messages into their directories, and then we got those as the MSG. We also received the records of Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst and a few legislative records that are starting to kind of trickle in. Again, this is coming out of the Legislative Services Division, which was another homemade content management system, different from the Governor's Office, developed by the Legislative Services, and unlike the Governor's Office, they don't share that with us. So basically what we got from them were PDF printouts of individual emails and then some reports that came out of their content management system, as opposed to getting the entire database like we got with Governor Perry's office. We did get one large PST file from a former director of the Texas Youth Commission, and those were emails, not just calendars, and we're still kind of dealing with those, and I'll talk about those here in just a second. So let's see, I was able to, yeah, there we go. So this is the I think I actually did, yes. So here's the correspondence tracking system that we got from Governor Perry. And if anybody was at BPE in 2014 in Alabama, this is what I talked about there. We got their database. It was a SQL 2012 database. And then we also got the image repository of basically the PDFs of all the correspondence. And I will say this, when we talk about getting email from the Governor's office, like Kentucky, what we got was constituent correspondence. We did not get internal email. In fact, we actually got a PIA request for emails with Governor Perry, or from Governor Perry, and to the best of our knowledge, there are no emails with his name actually attached to them other than something that he signed and they sent out. We did get internal correspondence from the standpoint of if the constituent mail came into one division and was transferred to another, then we got that kind of correspondence back and forth. So the other complication was, as of about 2009, the Governor's office had a correspondence system on their website to where somebody could fill out a form and then would automatically get dumped into the database. So they weren't actually sending in correspondence. Now, this doesn't mean they didn't get correspondence, because basically in the database for any given day, they had several tens of thousands of entries, and they commonly, toward the end of the administration, maxed out the daily entries they could enter into the database. So we're still talking millions of email, or millions of individual correspondence. So the CTS system contains all the incoming and the outgoing correspondence from the Governor's office. And the Governor's office, actually, their IT staff came over and installed the database here in our facility and helped us set it up. They had created a graphical interface for it, which is what you see here. And while we have the database and we can still query the database ourselves, they did create the searchable front end. And what you can see down on the lower left-hand corner is it tracks email by the individual. So you see that person's name up at the top. This is all the correspondence that's tagged to this person. And then you can click on any one of those given emails and see whether or not there was responses, whether or not it was transferred within the agency. You have things like the issues and responses, comments. If one division transferred it to another division, they may have tagged it with some comments along with that. And then you can also see the individual mail. We actually appraised the CTS database as a record in and of itself because we discovered that there's a lot of information within the database that's not present if we just had the individual images of the correspondence. A lot of that internal discussion, a lot of the tracking that they did, and some of the web-based email wasn't necessarily captured in here either. The other problem that we had is this is written in VB6 and an older version of VB6, and our internal IT staff was concerned that if this graphical interface ever kind of breaks, they can't support it. We can still have the database, we can still write queries to the database, but we would lose this kind of graphical front end for that. And as I mentioned, we also got PST files from the director of the Texas Youth Commission. And my colleague Brian Thomas and I are itching to kind of put these things, the PST files, into Preservica to test the PST upload. But our impediment to doing that is this right here. This is our biggest problem with email in general, and this is one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of email in Preservica at the moment, is because all of this email is restricted. Through our Public Information Act, almost anything that somebody requested would have to be reviewed by an archivist before it would be disclosed. So even if it was an email that didn't require any redaction, somebody would still have to sit down and look at it to make sure that there wasn't anything in there that needs to be redacted. And the other problem that we have is currently Preservica doesn't have any mechanism for doing that review and redaction. And to a certain extent, I don't think they should. We're using the Adobe Acrobat tool to do redaction. We also have BitCurator installed, so we have things like bulk extractor to where we can do analysis on large groups of documents. But it's not just a matter of simply removing Social Security numbers or names or email addresses. It's also doing things like attorney-client privilege and specific types of information that are somewhat subjective, and it's hard to automate that. And I'd rather have those tools kind of outside of the preservation environment so we have the ability to manipulate these things and then be able to do that. So even if we had these things in Preservica, for example, we'd still have to download them, convert them to a PDF file, and then do the redaction on that. One of the things that we have started doing, because, again, some of you may know, some of you may not, one of the requirements from our state IT people for us to get our exemption to use Preservica in the cloud was to move from the Amazon public cloud into the Amazon government cloud, which was something that Preservica did for us. They created a new tenancy for us in the Amazon government cloud right at the end of last year. So the government cloud gives us more back-end security and things like encryption at rest and stuff like that, which was what our state IT folks required us to have in order to start putting restricted data up there. So what we're starting to do right now is put up the redacted copies of email messages that have things like that PIA stuff that could be easily taken out. Obviously, if it's attorney-client stuff, we can't necessarily put that up there because that's still there. You'd end up getting one big black box, essentially. But we are starting to look at these things. So again, we have some individual email messages that we've put up. We do have some of the calendars that we've done. And this is the problem with the PST files from the director of the Texas Youth Commission. We've gotten a lot of PIA requests on his files because there was somewhat of a scandal involving the Youth Commission. But again, they're all restricted. So, and there is the review and redaction part that we still kind of have to do that. We can put them up as restricted files, but even if we put them up, we'd still have to take them down to do the review and potential redaction for that. So yes, we will try to preserve the CTS system. We'll put it up there as a database. We also have the individual PDF files of the individual scans of the correspondence, which we can do. The calendars we actually have uploaded into Preservica as a test and converted them to the EML files, which is a more open format. And we're still kind of waiting to be able to potentially put up that PST file and hopefully be able to do some kind of work with that. So with that, that's all that I have, I guess. And I'll turn it back over to Michael at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I'm sure we'll get plenty of questions on that at the end in terms of what you're doing. You certainly got some real-world challenges and a real mix of different systems which are going to need preserving. What I'm going to talk about just briefly now is just share with you a sort of Gmail example, and the same sort of mechanisms would apply to doing an Outlook sort of ingest and preservation. So it's just to show you in practice to bring some of the things I was talking about at the beginning, and also some of the things that Mark has talked about. So bring those to life a little bit, so you can see how they might function in a sort of preservation environment. So just to set the scene, Preservica as a preservation platform has a number of connectors for connecting to other systems, and we can sort of automatically ingest Outlook and Gmail and also Lotus Notes today, both MSG and PSTs and Mbox and whatever format Lotus Notes comes across in. And so that sort of process can start in Gmail itself. So this is a typical Gmail account, which is up in the cloud, and this is an email thread with a couple of emails. And as you can see, the core of the email is actually in the attachment, which is a release note for one of the previous versions of our software. So what you can do is to take that information, go into this sort of administration area of Google, and create an archive, which allows you to actually download. You can select which bits you want to download, which folders, or you can download the whole of the Google environment into a zip file, and zip that up and download that to wherever you need to. It can be sent to you as an email. You can then have that on your local client. So that allows you to effectively receive an Mbox file which has whatever you've selected. So you could have the entire inbox. You could have all of your sent emails, as well as your calendars, contacts, etc. But that that archiving function within Google, and it works in a similar way within an Outlook archive export as well. So that can be brought down, and then that can actually be recognized and imported or ingested into the preservation platform. So here it's showing a tool which we call the Upload Wizard, which is a simple sort of three-step process. So you can see the zip file, which is the Mbox file from Gmail, being found on the local drive. The second step is then to point that you find a collection you want to actually send that to in the system, and there's just one collection that this particular submitter has got access to, and then that file can be uploaded into that email folder, and off it goes into the cloud. There's also another method where the file can also be dropped into a sort of watched folder and sort of automatically ingested as well. Once it gets into Preservica, then a sort of ingest routine is kicked off. Some of the important steps here are you can see there, process packaging steps. So it's actually taking that Mbox file and effectively pulling it apart, pulling out all of the individual emails, looking at all of the attachments, and bringing those into the system. Crucially, it does virus checking, which is probably more important on emails than anything else. You might get people who've not actually opened emails or not deleted emails because they thought there might be a virus in there. So it's important to check for virus files. As I said, fixity checking to make sure what you're putting in is what has been sent, and then some other crucial steps, characterizing the files so you know exactly what you have, which is a fundamental part of being able to move them forward and migrate them in the future. And also there's a normalization step, so that that Mbox file is actually converted to an open format, to EML, which makes it more easier to work with and easier to preserve for the long term. So once it's in the system, it kind of looks like this. So we don't throw the original mbox file away. So that's the one with the question mark on there on the first chart. So we keep the original mbox. There might be other ways of migrating the content in there forward in the future. So we always keep a copy of that. But then there's a few collections which are created, which are based mainly on the folder structure. So you can see there an inbox collection and a sent collection, which represent the two original folders from Gmail. And then each individual email is a record in its own right. So you can see two records in there representing two emails. If you click on the middle one, then you get the record opens up, and in that record you have the email text itself, now in an EML format, and also you have the attachment which went with that we saw right at the beginning on Google. In this particular example, as a Word document. So you have the EML and you have the Word attachment. If you go ahead and click on the email, and you get a familiar environment in which to render that. So you can look at the emails, you can render the emails without having to have the native Google or Microsoft Outlook or Lotus Notes running. You get the from, to, etc. And you also get any attachments which were attached to that file, so you're able to look through that record. You can click on that attachment, and it will open up, as you can see there, the Word docx format of the original. Or if you're concerned about that format and you want to be able to migrate that to another format, then you can use the preservation capabilities within Preservica to migrate that to different formats. You might want to move that to an open office format if you wanted something which was more open, or you might want to move it to a PDF format if you wanted something which was being used for presentation purposes, or you might just leave it and move it to Microsoft Office or to Microsoft Word 2030 in whenever it is, 15 years time. In this case, we can create a second manifestation, and in this case I've done a preservation run and turned that into a PDF. The original Word document is still there, so you now have the email text, and you can have a choice of different manifestations if you like. You can either look at the original Word, or you can have the PDF for presentation and presentation reasons. So just in terms of search, as I said, search is very important if you want to be able to find information quickly. And we saw that Mark potentially had a big challenge with the CTS system, in the fact that if the GUI front end wasn't supported anymore and went away, it'd be quite difficult to begin interrogating that database to find emails. So search is very important. There's two ways you can apply search at the moment within the system. You can obviously do a search by word, so I've searched here on release note, but they can also then add filter, and because we import all of the metadata, comes with the file, it comes with the email in terms of who it's from. You can just focus here on emails, who it's from, put values in there, who it went to, who was copied, what sort of tag it might be. It could be a personal or private tagged email. Then you can filter down your search, and that will just bring back the one email email record that you're looking for. that was a very quick run through to give you an idea of doing email preservation, what's involved. There is actually a longer webinar which you can look at on the Preservica.com in the resources area. If you look at some of the previous webinars, there's a Gmail webinar you can look at, as well as an Outlook webinar, which is actually a live recording of the whole process. That was just to give you a flavour and to emphasise some of the sort of practical elements of working with email. So long-term preservation, as I said, the original email format is retained. Email is migrated to an open EML format on ingest. Attachments, as we saw, can be migrated post-ingest to any format that there's a migration pathway for, and all of the conversational relationships are also retained. In terms of accessibility, the email is displayed in a familiar rendering framework without needing to have the native application. There's also access control if you have particular types of emails or records and you want to make them private or more secure, or limit access to certain individuals within the organization. You can do that. And searchability, as I said, all the metadata comes across. You can filter on different typical email fields to home on your search. Something I didn't look at on this presentation was categorization and tagging. In fact, we look at this on the digital preservation workshop, and Jack does a very nice presentation of it, where we can tag emails, personal emails, and mark those for deletion, so we can get rid of the personal emails. So we just have emails which are important, or you might want to tag emails if there's a retention period for them to be deleted or appraised in 5 or 10 years time. And also, didn't get a chance to show you some of the trustworthy elements in terms of the audit trails and the fixity, etc. But if you look at some of the other webinars, as I said, up on the website, you'll be able to look at how that works. So just to summarize the whole webinar, very big thanks to Mark for joining us. So email is very much now a default form of correspondence. The email itself is not often the most important part. It's sometimes more important. The attachment is equally as important. It's a requirement and a challenge both from a policy and a compliance side and an accessioning side, as well as from a technical side. If you're looking anything over 10 years, then you're looking long-term preservation. We've seen some of the challenges that Mark has, in particular with some custom-built and proprietary environments, and also the need for redaction. And I think if you're looking seriously at email, then you're going to need some help in terms of automation, and tools become a vital part of it. Otherwise, you can be left with a lot of wading through stuff manually. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back to Sarah, who's going to give you some next steps.
Well, actually, we have a couple of questions.
Okay,
we have a question from Mark to either one of you two. Do you know if running Droid on a PST file will pick up and identify any attachments within it?
Not off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either. So maybe we can take that away. It's certainly obviously within Preservica, we look at we unpackage all of the attachments and the email and all the metadata that goes with it. But I don't know whether Droid itself can do that. But we can check and get an email back.
That would be great, and we'll get that out to the group. Any other questions from anybody about either of these systems, or questions or problems or redaction or not redaction? Or
I see a question in the Q&A section.
okay, I got to scroll down for that. Hold on. I'm not seeing it. Go ahead, read it.
Okay, it's from Minnesota Historical Society. How many staff or how much staff time do you have available to do email review and redaction? Actually, probably a better question for my boss, Laura Fagert, because it's kind of spread out amongst the archivists, and it kind of depends on who's all handling the PIA requests. But there's about, 3 or 4 of the archivists that would deal with the PIA. Brian Thomas and I do a lot of the searching, just because we're a little bit more adept at searching the electronic files, but they do the review and redaction part. I know Laura would be happy to talk to you about the redaction that she's done on the Youth Commission emails, because we've actually gotten several requests for that.
And so when you redact those, you post them too then, Mark? Once they're redacted, or are they just PIA requests that you hand over?
There are PIA requests that we hand over. We
Okay.
have posted some of the documents that we've redacted in Preservica. And then we actually have a large batch of the Youth Commission emails that have been redacted that we're looking at possibly putting up the redacted copies into Preservica at this point. It's the kind of thing, if all the redaction is simply removing numbers and names, then we'll do the redaction and put those up. Other things require more subjective review, and it's a kind of review that could change depending on who the requester is. Those kinds of things really can't go up at that point. I also, while we were talking, Brian ran Droid on some email files, and no, it does not pick up attachments. So.
Wow, thanks, Brian. All right. I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, I said the joys of sitting next to people. So.
Yeah, no kidding. We have another question from Liz. It's kind of a two-parter. Based on the example, Preservica may download Gmail messages, convert to PDF with attachments, then upload without third-party software, correct? And then the second part of that is any specific PDF format used, such as PDFA?
Okay. Yeah, I think that Preservica will take the whole, if I've got this right, Gmail message. You can automate the whole thing, so you can have any particular Word document automatically being converted to PDF when it comes in, or you can do that manually as well, and then upload without third-party software. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm getting understanding the question fully.
And is it going to PDF or PDFA, or it's PDFA, right?
You can choose. So there's
okay.
a whole selection of, depending on the original file, you can choose a migration pathway which can take you to PDFA or PDF, latest version of PDF.
All right. Liz, did that answer your question? Okay.
I think there's also another question above from Carini. Are mailbox structures retained at ingest? Yes, they are. So they come in as the collections within. So you'll have different mailboxes or different folders within the mailbox will come in as different collections. So the whole structure and all the context and all the relationships are all retained. And then, as you saw, then individual emails become individual records within the system.
There was another question on the Q&A from Mary Johnson about what would the challenges have been if the governor's people hadn't loaded the whole thing into your system? Great one. because we actually were talking to our internal IT staff about hiring database administrator and being able to set that up. It's an SQL database, so we could run queries on the database if we needed to. And there's a few of us that could do that, some better than others. But they basically, our IT people have told us if the graphical front end breaks, it's gone unless we want to hire somebody to recreate it. Now, I will say the governor staff that transferred the stuff to us from Governor Perry are still there in Governor Abbott's administration, so we still have access to them. But yeah, it was a coup, I think, that we got them to come over and install the database and set it up for us.
That's such a nice relationship to build too. Either, you know, just with that office, no matter who's in there.
Yeah, I mean, we had over a year of discussions with the governor's office while they were still there. I know in one of the problems we had with a former governor was they transferred us his records at the end of term, and he had been a federal congressman prior to becoming governor. And when he became governor, he changed the internal correspondence management system to what he used in Congress, which wasn't IQ, it was CC6. And we didn't realize that when they transferred us the files, it's a proprietary format, and we didn't have a license to the format. So once we figured that out, all of his people were gone, and the next administration was in, and not only was it a new administration, they changed parties, and they really didn't care about recovering his email. So you can talk to Glenn Mackinnon about how he has to search the CDs for that, because we did again, we got the data, but we didn't have the ability to really query it very well and all of that. So.
Yeah, it sounds like a classic digital preservation challenge, and the need to move away from, you know, to openness as soon as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Anybody else have any questions that I can or cannot see?
I don't see any more in the Q&A.
All right, good. All right. So just to wrap things up, we've got our Preservica webinar recordings that if you want to go out and see some more about Preservica specifically, but we have a lot of great resources here within CoSA in general. And then we have our Practical Digital Preservation online workshop. And then we have our next how-to webinars coming up. Again, if you want to register for those, if you haven't, please feel free to go and do that. And I think that is it. We've done the questions. Again, when you close your browser, there will be a survey, and you will receive a copy of these slides if you are so interested, so inclined. And thanks, everybody, for coming and showing up. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Mark
everybody.
and Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Take care.